Hi guys, I'm Dr. Tara Tobias. I want to welcome you all back to this channel. In today's tutorial, we are going to go over something that comes up quite a bit in the comments, and that is the issue or the concern with repetitions. In other words, how many times should I do this exercise? But I'm actually going to broaden it because I've done a whole video on this topic, and I will put a link for that video in the description below. But there's a couple of other questions that come up quite a bit that kind of fall into the same category that I'm going to term motor learning. So how the brain relearns a movement after any kind of damage to the brain or the spinal cord. So even if you've heard me talk about this before, I still think you'll get a lot of value out of watching this, if for nothing else, just to reinforce the importance of how you are approaching your home exercise program, or how you are selecting how much time you are devoting to each exercise. But before we get into that, if you're new to this channel and you haven't yet subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, turn on that notification bell so that you'll be notified every time I upload new videos. So there are three terms that we're going to cover in today's video, and those are motor learning, motor performing, and motor or muscle strengthening. So first, what is motor learning? So motor learning is the acquisition of a new skill. Now that's much different than motor performing, which motor performing is really just how you execute a skill. And that's much different than muscle strengthening, which is making a muscle bigger. And I've talked about that in depth because I think most people that have suffered any type of injury to their brain or their spinal cord, when you approach your exercises, most of the time you are thinking motor strengthening. And we really need to tap into more of this motor learning and motor performing. So if you've watched that video, and again, I mentioned it earlier, but I highly recommend that you watch the video that I did on the difference between motor learning and muscle strengthening. But now let's talk about these two terms, motor learning versus motor performing. And the ability to perform a skill or a movement does not necessarily mean that your brain has learned a skill. So performing is something that maybe you do it in therapy and your therapist walks you through it, and you do it 10 times, then your therapist lets go and you do it. And everyone's like super excited because you made this movement happen, which is great. Don't get me wrong. Absolutely, I celebrate every time that happens, and I get so excited for my patients when that happens in therapy. But I always have to hold back a little bit internally. I may not say anything externally because I know that just because I witnessed that one instance of someone doing a skill does not necessarily mean they've learned the skill. So I always have to check myself. And the way that we do that is we'll leave that activity for a bit, whether that's 2 minutes, 5 minutes, or an entire session, and come back to that same movement. And without any type of a warm-up or without any type of cueing, we'll ask someone to perform that movement again. And if they can do it, that means that someone has learned the skill. If they can't do it and we have to go through that same scenario where the therapist or where I help someone or encourage someone or provide the right tactile cues to facilitate a normal movement pattern, then we do that. But ultimately, my goal as a therapist is that I'm slowly backing off of how much help I'm offering someone, because that is the only way I'm going to help someone to actually learn a skill. And now the ultimate goal for everyone in neuro rehab, whether you've suffered injury to your brain or your spinal cord, is that eventually you will learn a skill. And I've talked about this in depth, and I will put links for these videos in the description below, but I talked about this in depth in the video where I talked about the stages of recovery, and the ultimate goal is that we move through these stages of motor learning to the point where a movement or the normal movement that we're looking for is automatic, meaning someone doesn't really have to think about it. So there's a lot of skill that goes into that, and neurotherapists are really strategizing a ton while you're performing your exercises as to how do we facilitate those two things. How do we facilitate someone to get to the next stage in the motor learning process? And how do we ensure that we are getting over that hump of just someone performing a movement and actually get to a point where someone is learning a movement? So why does all of this matter to you? And that is because of this question that comes up over and over and over again in the comments. And I get it. There are a lot of new people joining this channel that haven't probably heard my rant when I go off on this, so I have no issue re-explaining why this is so important. But the question is, how many times should I do this exercise? And if you notice in most of my videos, I never give a number like 3 sets of 10 or 2 sets of 15 or 3 times a week. That's a lot of stuff that you'll hear with muscle strengthening. And there is a theory behind that when you are strengthening a muscle. But we aren't addressing the muscle, and we're not trying to make a muscle bigger. We are trying to get the brain to learn and form new connections around a new skill. The same way we learn as we're going through school is the exact same way we learn as adults. So how many times do you reinforce something to children? Math problems, equations. You do it multiple ways. You have charts, you have multiplication tables, but kids are being fed that information over and over and over again, 8 hours a day for 12 years of their life. Why? Because it's repetition. It is learning. They need to get that information over and over and over again. And then what happens? They have homework and they have to actually take what they learned in school, process it, and learn how to apply it. Neuro rehab or movement recovery is exactly the same. The only difference is now you aren't spending 8 hours in therapy, or maybe spending 1 to 2 hours in therapy, so the amount of homework that you need to do is double or triple that to apply what you did in therapy at home to reinforce that movement or start learning that new movement or skill. So how do you do this? My suggestion is you start with 1 or 2 movements, preferably joints that are closer to the center of your body. So after any type of damage to your neurologic system where your movement's been affected, you usually regain that movement with joints that are closer to the center and then move out from there. So that is how I would approach your exercises. Start with joints that are close, such as the shoulders and the hips. Pick 1 or 2 movements and do it over and over and over again. And as many of you have heard in several of my videos, pick something that you could do successfully. Start with something easier and then move to something harder. So I like to start with things laying down, then sitting, then standing. What that's doing is starting with a very stable core and then slowly moving away from some of that stability to challenge those movements a little bit more. And then always carry it over with something where you can apply that movement to your day. So if you're working on shoulder movement, maybe carry that over into a reaching activity such as reaching across the counter or reaching into a cabinet, which would be extremely challenging. If you're working on leg movement and you're working on hip movement, carry that over into something standing or walking within 1 session. Remember, if you haven't really learned the skill yet, if you stop and come back, most likely you're going to have to start over with that movement retraining before you apply it to something functional. And just keep at it. You can do it. Read the comments. You will see comment after comment on almost every video of people who are doing this and it works. So don't give up. Read the comments when you get discouraged and keep at it. If you think about it, we spent 12 years in school learning is hard. It is not the same as strengthening a muscle. It is hard and it takes repetition. And the more you put in the work, the more successful you're gonna become. And one other thing, I'm gonna get on my little soapbox again for a minute, but if a therapist has ever told you that you can't make any more progress, or that you've met all your goals, or that you have plateaued and that you should just stop physical therapy altogether, that is not a reflection of your limitations. That is a reflection of their limitations. They have run out of ideas on how to help you, and that is not your fault. And that is not a direct representation of your potential. So I believe in you. I know you have more potential. I know that hard work always pays off, even after a neurologic injury, and you can do this. But that is it for this video. If you're new to this channel and you haven't yet subscribed, please subscribe to this channel. If you haven't turned on your notification bell yet, definitely turn on your notification bell. But now that is it for this video. I know I say that every time, like 3 times during the outro or towards the end of the video, but that is it for this video. I enjoyed spending time with you all today, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next video. You all have a good day.